Welcome to the conclusion of Homeschoolers of Maine's video series, Your Voice Matters, featuring prominent voices from around the state and the country, all speaking to us about the importance of preserving freedom. I'm Angela Hurd. Even though this is our concluding video, the Protecting Freedom page will remain live all year round, where you can re-watch any of the videos and utilize the resources that are on that page and continue sharing the page with your family and friends. You can also continue submitting your homeschoolers works of art and poetry, music, and other writing pieces about protecting freedom, and continue sending in stories and videos of your family's veterans through the Student Voices section on the Protecting Freedom page. Our concluding voice is Rick Green, founder of Patriot Academy, an elite leadership training program specializing in applied civics with a biblical, historical, and constitutional foundation. Rick is also a former Texas State Representative. He's also a national speaker, an author, and a radio host. Be sure to check out Patriot Academy and the radio show Wall Builders Live. May you be encouraged by Rick's message of hope as he speaks to us about the importance of bearing the burden of liberty, preserving freedom for the next generation, and understanding our important role in investing in the future. May you be blessed and let freedom ring.
Hey there, homeschoolers of Maine, my fellow homeschoolers, I should say. My name is Rick Green. I have homeschooled 4 kiddos myself. I say that. We all know how this works. My wife does all the hard work and the heavy lifting, and I just get to take credit every once in a while. But we were blessed to raise 4 kids homeschooling, or we like to call it bus schooling because we traveled around the country. At any rate, I love you as homeschoolers, and I appreciate what you're doing. But also to anyone that's watching this video, thank you, fellow American. So not just fellow homeschoolers. I know when I say my fellow Americans, it sounds like, I'm some actor in some movie playing the president of the United States or some politician in some movie. But you know what? We don't say that enough. My fellow Americans. We need to be reminded that we're in this together. We've had multiple generations now of the poison of cultural Marxism poured into our kids, poured into these schools, poured into the culture itself. And we've been at each other's throats. We've been taught to hate each other, to hate our country, to hate ourselves. And that has got to stop. The good news is that Americans are waking up, and I hope that I have a positive message for you today about how you can play a part in preserving freedom for the next generation. So let me just start by saying, be of good cheer. Hope is not lost. Hope is actually alive. And I think we have to be reminded of that. The timeless principles of liberty are not dead. They still work just as well as ever if they're used. The laws of nature and nature's God, they have not changed. They still work as well. So there's nothing we're facing. As Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing that we're facing right now, the challenges in your community and my community and our nation. There's nothing that is new that hasn't been faced by previous generations in some way, shape, or form. So I just think it's important for us to start by saying, we can be of good cheer. We can count it all joy when we experience various trials. We know that God can use these trials to make us even better and more perfect. So I think it's important to remember as well that the founders were right about the laws of nature and nature's God, that principles of liberty produce good results and principles of tyranny produce bad results. It's actually that simple. And I know that sounds way too simple, but it really comes down to the inputs. Garbage in, garbage out, right? We know that about ourselves. We know that about our brains. If we feed bad stuff in, then bad stuff's going to come out. We've told our kids that. Isn't it also true for a country? If you put bad stuff into a country, bad principles, bad policies, then you're going to get bad outcomes. So when we look at our nation right now and we see the division and we see all the bad policies and we see so many destructive things happening, we don't have to look at that and despair. We can look at that and say, okay, it's a bad result. That comes from bad policy given to us by bad politicians, but we chose those bad politicians. So I can follow that chain and go, okay, wait, I can change the inputs. So instead of having the bad inputs of tyranny into the culture, we can get the good inputs of liberty into the culture. Because when you use the principles of liberty, every time you do that, you're going to get prosperity, you're going to get more liberty, you're going to get security, you're going to get abundance, all these things. But when you put in the principles of tyranny, I can promise you the results are going to be obvious. You're going to get famine. You're going to get chaos. You're going to get shortages. You're going to get all the things that tyranny produces. It's our choice. It's sort of a collective choice. Boy, I hate using that word. It sounds socialistic, but it is. It's when you live in a constitutional republic, you do have to win over enough people in the community to fight for truth and to bring back those good principles. And so I guess I want to start this by saying you don't have to despair, but you do have to shift your focus a little bit. When you realize what we're up against as a nation, you got to make a commitment that says, you know what, I'm going to spend more of my time, more of my money, more of my energy, maybe some of my reputation to preserve the principles of liberty, maybe even restore the principles of liberty where they've been lost. That I'm not just going to enjoy the blessings of liberty, I'm going to bear the burden. I'm going to take on the responsibility to make sure that liberty survives. I think that's where we're at right now, folks. I think we're at a place where all Americans that care about the future of our country, that care about freedom for their children. I used to ask people, what's your freedom worth? I realize that's the wrong question. The right question is, what's your child's freedom worth? Maybe a better question, now that I'm a grandpa, is what's your grandchild's freedom worth? And if it's worth enough of your time and money and energy and all the things it's going to take to save this country and save liberty in a constitutional republic, then I hope that you'll be willing to invest in all of those things. Here's the great news. The principles of liberty do work. And because of the principles of tyranny producing such bad results, we have a ton of people that have awakened. They are ready. They want to help. They're saying, here, my Lord, send me. They don't know what to do yet, but the good news is we know what to do. We know how to do this. At Patriot Academy, this is what we're all about, is teaching people how to infuse the principles of liberty into their community. So the good news is people are awake, and I think we have an opportunity. We have a window of opportunity here to convert an entire generation to liberty and freedom. I think that's a tremendous opportunity we have before us. Now, I don't think that window is going to stay open forever. I think we have to seize the day right now. Carpe diem, right now. We've got to say, I want a revival of freedom, and I'm willing to do what it takes. If that's you, I hope we get a chance to lock shields together and work on these things. I'm going to try to get across three things to you in this presentation. First of all, I want you to know you are not alone. A lot of people feel that way in America. They've given up on the country. They think it's all lost. They feel like they're the only ones that still care about freedom, that see the danger of socialism and communism and all the negative things that have been really becoming prominent in our nation, and they think they're the only one. You are not. If you've been thinking that, trust me on this. You might feel like Elijah. Remember when Elijah said, I'm the only one, God, only one that hasn't bowed their knee to Baal. And he said, no, 7,000 have not bowed their knee to Baal. I'm here to tell you, living testimony right now, I'm telling you, there are millions, tens of millions, maybe 100 million Americans that have not bowed their knee to Baal, that still believe in the principles of liberty, love the Constitution, love the Bible, love God, love their fellow Americans, and want to save liberty. I get to see it all the time. I travel the nation constantly. I get to speak to big groups. I get to see all these groups of patriots in every state. I'm telling you, California, Oregon, Washington, and yes, Maine. They're all over the nation. So don't believe you're the only one. Don't buy that lie. You are not alone. That's number one. Number two, I've already said it, but the principles of liberty still work. They're still alive. They still produce good results, but we have to know what they are. We have to know the formula so that we can infuse that into the culture and then get the good results. And then the third thing I hope to get across is that you have a role in this. Every single one of us get to participate in this wonderful revolution of freedom in America, this wonderful return to biblical citizenship. You get to play a role in that. You can make a difference, whether it's right there in your family, in your neighborhood, in your church, in your community, maybe your state, and perhaps even for the whole nation. Every single one of us has a role to play. So don't think there's no action that you can take that's going to make a difference. I promise you there are a ton of things that you can do. I'm going to try to mention some of those during this presentation, but I really encourage you to take our Patriot Academy courses. We have the only Constitution classes on the planet that you'll actually stay awake for. That's right. Yes, they're not boring. They're not going to put you to sleep. I hated history and government when I was in high school and college. I slept through those classes. They were so boring. All you did was memorize dates and names. It wasn't applicable to my life. That's not our Constitution classes. In all of our Constitution classes and biblical citizenship classes, our government classes, it's entertaining, it's fun, we bring it to life, and we make it applicable to you and your family. So I promise you, you will enjoy doing a lot of those things. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of that today, but I do want to encourage you to check out patriotacademy.com and get some of your friends and family involved. I'm going to state the obvious a little bit. I know that, if you're watching this, you already know the negatives that are happening out there, but I do think we have to assess the patient before we provide the cure, okay? And I think we have to be eyes wide open about how serious the situation is in our country right now. And so I'm just going to rattle off a few of the things that have happened. Don't give up on me, all right? Don't tune out. I'm not here to depress you. I'm going to rattle off some of these things. I'm going to go through this, but then we're going to talk about solutions and how we change it and how we restore liberty. But first, we got to be honest about what we face. And actually, I'm going to read you a quote. I think this is probably an overused quote, but it's been on my website for almost 25 years. So I feel like I have permission, I guess, to use it, even though it's not me that said it. It's Ronald Reagan that said it. You've probably heard it. I'm sure you have. He said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream." Think about that. Just because you had kids, just because they were raised in America, doesn't mean they understand freedom. In fact, I'm here to tell you, I live just outside of Austin, Texas. A kid born in Austin, Texas will make you just as good a communist as one born in Beijing or Moscow. I'm telling you, in fact, in Austin, Texas, they probably have a better chance of becoming a communist than in some of these other countries because of the left-wing politics in Austin. So don't think that just because you have kids raised in America, they're going to understand freedom. That's what Reagan was saying here. So we didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. He said it must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. That's why we call our foundation the Torch of Freedom Foundation. Patriot Academy is kind of our trade name that most people know us by, but the parent foundation is called Torch of Freedom Foundation. It all comes from this quote by Ronald Reagan. We've got to pass this on. We've got to pass the torch of freedom. We've got to protect it, but then we have to pass it intact to the next generation and teach them how to preserve and protect it. Then he said this, and this is the part that I never thought this would feel so real like it does today. He said, "Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in America, in the United States, where men were free." You've thought about this, I bet. You've thought, wow, am I going to have to tell my kids and my grandkids what it was once like in the United States where men were free? What if my grandkid is going to say to me, "What were you doing? Hey, Poppy, why weren't you doing something to keep liberty alive? Why did it die on your watch? Why did your generation fumble the passing of the torch? Why did you not protect it so that I could live in freedom?" Whew. I don't want my grandkids saying that to me, and I know you don't want your grandkids saying that to you. So let me just do an exercise here. Let's just pretend for a second. I'm hoping I'm not in my sunset years yet, but let's just pretend for a second that we are in our sunset years. And we're having to say to our children and grandchildren what it was once like in the United States of America where men were free. I never imagined we would be saying some of these things and that they would be true, but here we are. Just hear me out on this. I think we have to say to our children right now, there was a time in America where the answer to the question, who decides, that the answer to that question more often than not was you. You get to decide. Not a government bureaucrat, not some government official. Most often in the American story, in our history, if I said who decides the education of your children, we would say the parents. Not so in a lot of places in America now. Not so everywhere in America if you allow all of the laws that have been passed at the federal level and the state level to actually be forced on you. In the past, in the most of American history, if I said who decides your health care decisions, we would have said you. You decide that. Not anymore. Now it's some government bureaucrat. Now it's either some state health official or even all the way up to the CDC. And boy, did they get everything wrong throughout this entire process. But yet, the question of who decides whether or not you open your business, whether or not you open your church, whether or not you have to wear a mask that inhibits your breathing, even though the science doesn't show that it helps at all in preventing the spread or catching COVID. But the government's going to decide for you. You don't get to decide that anymore. They get to decide. I mean, we could go down a long list of all of these areas of who decides. I mean, just imagine as parents actually living in a place where you get to decide the upbringing of your children. You get to decide their education. You get to decide their medical choices. You get to decide the appropriate age for them to be exposed to mature topics. I mean, there was a time in America when it was a universal American value that we called parental rights. I serve on the board of an organization, parentalrights.org, and we're fighting in the trenches in every state and at the federal level to restore parental rights. But there was a time when that wasn't even that was not even a question. Everybody understood. The parents decide. Now it's a real debate whether you decide or the parents. I've been in many horrible situations where the government has stepped in with medical kidnapping of children over things that absolutely did not deserve government intervention. We're not talking about abusive situations here. We're talking about medical decisions where there were multiple options for what to do, and because a parent made a decision that a social worker didn't like. Anyway, I don't want to go down that path, but I'm telling you, there are people in this country that believe you do not get to make that decision for your children, that some expert needs to decide that. Well, there was a time in America when men were free, and that was not the case. Imagine that you live in a community where you have shared just basic values, and that those basic values are reflected in the public square. And maybe for your community, you choose to live in some place where obscene violations of decency are not the norm, that they're not celebrated at the local public library, that they're not forced upon or taught to our children at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. Imagine being able, if you think that's too prudish and you don't think that's how it should be, being able to leave that community and go to a community, say San Francisco or some other community, where those things are all out in the public, that's what you see everywhere, and where you celebrate every form of deviancy and licentiousness that one might want or desire. You can choose. There was a time when you could choose to live in that community, but you couldn't make every community be like that. There was a time in America where free enterprise was celebrated, where freedom of choice was celebrated, where we were allowed to have different communities with different belief systems, and you could vote with your feet, and you could choose to live in that area that reflected your values. Now we live in a time in America where the federal government is no longer a federal government, it's a national government, and it's forcing the values of whoever gets elected president or Speaker of the House on the whole country. You've got a San Francisco cabal right now running Washington, D.C., and they're trying to force San Francisco values on the whole nation. Boys and girls bathrooms and showers, boys and girls sports, giving literally life-altering drugs and things to children that are just asking questions that, frankly, people have asked from the beginning of time. It's just unbelievable. The usurping of parental rights for political agendas that is happening these days. There was a time in America where it wasn't that way. Let me speak to you entrepreneurs for just a second. Imagine living in a place where you choose when to open or close your business. Wow, wouldn't that be a novel concept? You choose whether or not the sign on the door says closed or open. The person that started the business and runs the business, I can't imagine we would let people make that decision on their own. But yeah, there was a time in America where you got to do that. You actually used to get to decide whom you were going to hire and fire. Yeah, government didn't decide that for you. You decided. You even got to decide how much you were going to charge for your product. Just imagine keeping most of your profits instead of them being taken from you and given to someone else that didn't exercise equal industry and skill, as Thomas Jefferson said. In fact, let me read his quote. He said, "To take from one because it is thought that his own industry and that of his father's has acquired too much, in order to spare, give to others who have not exercised equal industry and skill, is to violate arbitrarily the first principle of association, the guarantee to everyone of a free exercise of his industry and the fruits acquired by it." That's Thomas Jefferson. He's basically saying if we take what you've worked for and give it to somebody else that didn't work as hard, we violated the basic principle of association. You know, there was a time in America where we believed in free enterprise and Adam Smith's invisible hand, that meant millions of people making their own decisions would produce a better outcome for the whole nation, rather than some bureaucrat in some office in Washington, D.C., or at your state capitol making decisions for everybody. We know that doesn't produce a good result. Every time in history when socialism and communism are implemented in an economy, it makes things worse. It destroys that state or nation. We know that. We used to know that in America, but we don't teach that anymore. Let me just do one more for pastors. You know, this one's tough because I didn't think we would see this on our watch. But for pastors and religious leaders, imagine a time in America where you decided when to open your church, where you could decide that if someone was working for your church and then living in whatever way publicly the exact opposite of the church, literally like thumbing their nose at the church and the faith, whatever religion you happen to be, that you could actually fire them, that you weren't forced to hire people and keep people on staff that were undermining everything that you were doing. Not so in many places in America now. So these are huge problems. These are huge challenges. I got to give one personal one, though. I said that was going to be the last one. But imagine you deciding whether or not to inhibit your breathing, whether or not you would wear a face mask, whether it's the flu or they call it the novel coronavirus. There's nothing novel about it. We face stuff like this in our history far worse than this, and we never did this insanity that we're doing right now. But whether it's a flu or virus spreading or whatever, imagine living in a nation where you decide how to combat that. You make the decision of whether or not to get on a plane or whether or not to wear a mask or whether or not to go places, whether or not to have a gathering at your home. Your decision, not government's. Imagine that. That's the way it's been throughout our history until the novel coronavirus, the not so novel, I should say. Imagine decisions on health care and pretty much any policy being made by elected representatives. Oh, wow, doesn't that sound amazing? Instead of one king, governors across this nation have been like kings for the last 2 years, making law on their own. Not the legislature making that law, a king, a governor, forcing things on their entire state without any law by the representatives of the people. That is unconstitutional. It violates Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution. Every state is guaranteed to be a republic, and it's been violated like crazy over the last 2 years. Imagine living in the United States when men were free, when the laws were made by elected representatives, not dictators, not petty tyrants. Well, folks, I know we've seen all of those things happen in the last few years. We've seen governors acting like tyrants. We've seen defunding and demeaning our police system. We've seen a two-tiered justice system where rapists and murderers are released while political prisoners are held without bail and denied due process. We've seen, frankly, the American culture literally crumbling right before our eyes, where our cities, our great cities, they're crumbling. I mean, they've become cesspools of crime and decadence as moral relativism has run the nation into the ground. And I say all of that, and I set all of this up to say that did not happen in a vacuum. All of those things that I've described are results. They are symptoms of the underlying problem, the real problem underneath. It's been festering for years, and it may be more simple than you think. But the real problem underneath is the fact that we've allowed civic and biblical ignorance among our people. We don't know the truth. We don't know what works and what doesn't work. We don't know how to form a good society anymore. Every state constitution in America, on the public education part of the Constitution, it says you're doing it to have informed citizenry, to have people that understand the principles of liberty and how to keep a republic working. But we stopped doing that. We stopped teaching civics. And so now, because we don't know the truth of how a good culture works, we've bought the lie. If we knew the plumb line, if we knew what to measure the promises of politicians by, we would know when to say no and when to say yes. And so I think we're where we are right now because we violated exactly what John Jay said. He was the first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, and he said that every member of the state, in other words, every citizen, ought diligently to read and study the Constitution and teach the rising generation to be free. By knowing their rights, they will sooner perceive when they've been violated and be the better prepared to defend and assert them. In other words, if you know your rights, you'll perceive the violation and immediately know how to peaceably defend and assert those rights. We've allowed the COVID crackdowns to turn many places in America into tyranny because we didn't know our rights. And out of fear, frankly, people were timid and afraid. They gave in to government controls because they were afraid. They didn't want to die. I mean, they were literally willing to give up their liberty for what they thought would be safety. Now, if we actually knew the data right now, if people actually uncovered all of this and we knew how many people actually died from COVID, not with COVID, and if we knew how many people had recovered with natural immunity, if that truth ever comes out, I can virtually guarantee you it will not be anywhere close to the swine flu, certainly not anywhere close to Spanish flu. Spanish flu was 25 times more deadly than COVID-19. And we didn't shut down the world when it was, kids were getting it in the morning and dying by midnight. That one really did affect the kids. This one does not, except for very rare exceptions. So it makes you wonder, why would we shut down Earth? Why would we give up our liberty for this virus that it turns out if the numbers are actually known, it's a nasty virus. I had it. I was down for 2 weeks. It's ugly. But if we actually get to a point where we would actually use the cures that are out there and the treatments and all the things instead of silencing anybody that speaks up, that's another problem we've got, folks. There was a time in America when you could debate issues. There was a time in the United States of America where if you disagreed with the government, you could stand up and say so and not be shut down or removed from polite society. When you don't allow debate, folks, when you don't allow that robust debate, you will not get to the truth. Patrick Henry said that in his Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech. He started by saying, according to the magnitude of the subject ought to be the freedom of the debate. It's only by that means can we get to the truth. In other words, you might say things that are offensive, but my goodness, that's necessary to have robust debate. I can't think of a subject, how do you put it, the magnitude of the subject? I can't think of a subject bigger than shutting down the world, not allowing churches to meet, shutting down businesses, all the psychological trauma that has come from this whole situation. It's a big subject. The magnitude of the subject has been huge. Why has the freedom of the debate not been huge? We're in this situation because we did not have robust debate. We've got to have that. We've got to get back to that. So all of this to say, I think because of our fear and our timidity, we allow this to happen. And another Ronald Reagan quote, when the space shuttle exploded, I was a freshman in high school when it was the Challenger when it exploded. He gave a speech that night speaking to the school children of America. It was an amazing speech. And in fact, I'm just going to play a video for you that kind of tells this story. It's just a 2-minute video. Let's cut to that real quick. But here's one of my favorite quotes from President Reagan that I think fits the moment today. He famously said, "The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave." Now that quote is great, but when you put it in context, it's even greater. This quote was the day that the shuttle Challenger blew up with all of us watching it on television. In fact, I remember this moment. I was a freshman in high school. We were at school and everybody was watching the launch. And when this happened, it shocked the nation, and in many ways it scared the nation. It caused us to question, should we be taking chances like this? So let me put Reagan's quote in context. Here's what he said in the middle of his speech as he was putting this moment, answering to the American people, should we be doing this kind of thing? And he said this. He said, quote, "I want to say something to the school children of America who are watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff." So Reagan was talking to me.
"I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow."
Friends, that's the kind of attitude we need in America. I believe there's still pioneers in America that fearlessly pursue happiness, like the Declaration says. Men like Elon Musk, who's taken us back into space. But also people right here on Earth in the middle of the Chinese COVID crackdowns. There's courageous business owners like that beautician in Dallas, Texas, Shelley Luther, or the barber in Michigan, Carl Mankey, the gym owners, Ian Smith and Frank Trombetti in New Jersey. They all refused the nanny state that was being forced upon us by politicians. Those, all three of them and others, they have been fined, arrested, taken to jail for simply opening their businesses, for simply believing in individuals to have the freedom and the good sense to make their own health decisions rather than being controlled by the governors in their states that are acting like dictators. Abbott in Texas and Whitmer in Michigan and Murphy in New Jersey famously, who said when he was asked how this squares with the Bill of Rights, he said, "I wasn't thinking of the Bill of Rights, that was above his pay grade," when in fact the Bill of Rights should be on the mind of every elected official from Water District up to President of the United States. All right, folks, I think that's true. I think we've got to become the brave. The future does not belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. So let's be the brave. All right, here we go. Back to what we can do about this. I said at the beginning, be of good cheer, and then I spent a lot longer talking about all the things that are wrong than I had planned to. All of that to say, every one of those problems can be solved. We can restore liberty in this country if we recognize that civic ignorance, biblical ignorance, that is the petri dish where bad government grows. And the good news is we can give, just as you can give yourself immune boosters to make your immune system stronger, we can give civic boosters to the culture, to ourselves, to our family, to the people in our state, to teach them truth so that we can once again get the principles of liberty thriving in our culture. I'm sorry for all the Reagan quotes. I don't usually quote him this much, even though I do have a son named after him. But he also said, if we forget what we did, we won't know who we are. And I think by not telling the stories of American history, by not talking about the heroes, we lost our courage in many ways. You know, we began to believe in this timidity. If we had been telling the stories of America, we would have said, we're not cowards. Americans aren't snowflakes. We don't go hide at home because there's a virus going around. The American DNA, my goodness, that started with these unbelievably brave pilgrims that came over here suffering all kinds of harm and all kinds of disease. The American DNA, man, that's made up of the men at Lexington who were outnumbered 11-1, and yet they stood against the greatest military power on the planet. Outnumbered 11-1? You feel like you're alone. They were outnumbered 11-1. How about my DNA here in Texas? The Alamo, they were outnumbered 40-1. And yet they stood and fought. In fact, the immortal 32 from Gonzales, Texas, fought their way into the Alamo, knowing they were going to die, but they were willing to die for freedom. The DNA of Americans, man, that's those men and women that ran into burning buildings to save lives. That's the American DNA. How have we forgotten these young boys? Not just 18, 19, 20-year-olds. I've interviewed World War II vets that were 15, 16, 17 when they lied about their age to get in. And then they stormed the beaches of Normandy and Iwo Jima and all these other places. They laid down their life, or they went through a living hell in order to preserve freedom. We are not snowflakes. And if we remember what we did, we remember those stories, then we'll remember who we are as Americans. I'm going to challenge you to share the stories of who we are as Americans. Shake people out of their slumber, out of their apathy, and get them to understand the importance of being a good citizen, of being an informed citizen, of loving freedom, and being willing to go out there and fight for it. And when I say fight for it, I mean go out there and stand up for truth. Speak truth, whether it's on social media, at the town square, at your church, wherever it is, when you're around friends, family, whatever. Speak truth. Now, you got to learn truth. We got to put some time into studying. The truth will set you free, but you got to know the truth. So know that you're not alone. Know that these principles of liberty do work every time they're tried. And then go study those principles of liberty and learn the things you can do to preserve that liberty for future generations. We've got to be just like Joshua. I love the story of Joshua. And you go to Joshua 1:9 where God said, have not I commanded you? Be strong and of a good courage. Be not afraid. Neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with you whithersoever thou goest. It wasn't be strong if you can. It wasn't, if you feel courageous, then go ahead. No! It was a command, be strong and of a good courage. And courage is contagious. Friends, if you'll stand up with courage, I promise you, if you raise the flag, if you raise the banner, people will rally. I challenge you to host one of our Constitution classes in your home or the Biblical Citizenship in Modern America course at your church. It'll give you a rallying point for people to come together and learn these things I'm talking about, and then to have discussion and realize they're not alone. To be iron sharpening iron, it's a phenomenal way to make a difference in your community and to dive in and get these truths yourself. And here's the good news. It's all free. We give all of this away for free. You can take these Constitution classes for free. You can teach these Constitution classes for free. You can host them in your church for free. So I do encourage you, go to patriotacademy.com, learn more about that, get involved in some of those courses, and start being the difference maker in your community. I like to say it this way, be the catalyst in your community for restoring biblical values and constitutional principles. You can be that guy or gal. You can be a young person and do that. If you're watching this and you're 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, we have Constitution coaches that are young like that still host classes. You can do the same thing. Before I let you go, I want to mention just a couple other things, and I want to close with a story from American history. But one of the other things we do at Patriot Academy, if you're a military veteran and you're watching this, let me first say thank you. We would not have what we have if it wasn't for you. I couldn't do what I do if it wasn't for you. And Abraham Lincoln said the best way to honor you is for us to have an increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. So especially for those who died fighting for freedom. So certainly for those who paid the last full measure of devotion, but for all of you that served, the best way for us to thank you is for us to have an increased devotion to the cause. What's the cause? American exceptionalism, American values, our Constitution, our Declaration, the principles that come from that, the principles of liberty. We need to be devoted and have an increased devotion to that cause. That's how we thank you. If you were willing to serve, thank you for that. But now the best way I can thank you is actually go live my freedom and participate in the process. I do want to give you another tangible way that we can say thank you, and that is I want to invite you to join me in Texas at the state capitol the first week of August. We have what we call a Leadership Congress, normally for young people, 16 to 25 years old, but we do a special one just for military veterans the first week of August. Now, the young people will be over on the House side, but you military veterans will be on the Senate side, and you will live the life of a senator for a week. You will learn how a constitutional republic really works from inside. And the veterans always tell me after this, they're like, hey, Rick, now I get it. I really understand what I was fighting for. I understand how important this constitutional republic is. I would love for you to be a part of that. Check it out at patriotacademy.com. And also, young people, if you want to come to the 16 to 25-year-old program, we do those all over the country. We don't do one in Maine yet, but we do one in Dover, Delaware. That's getting somewhat close to y'all. Not real close, but somewhat close. Anyway, we would love to have you attend one of those programs with us, and you can learn more at patriotacademy.com. And that's kind of part of the encouragement. I want you to know there's people out there like us that are equipping millions of Americans to live out their freedom. We have graduates now that are serving in Congress and legislatures and business and the pulpit. I mean, all these different areas, but they're being good citizens. They're understanding biblical citizenship. And, you know, when you think about being the catalyst for a restoration of biblical values and constitutional principles in your community, one of the best things I can recommend is that you take our Biblical Citizenship in Modern America course and you get other people to go through it with you. You don't have to know anything. You don't have to have gone through law school or any of that stuff. You don't have to worry about people asking you questions you don't know the answer to. You're just the lead learner. You get the other people in the room and you do the class together and you learn together. It's a great opportunity to really understand biblical citizenship, and the videos are fantastic. We've got Kirk Cameron in there. We've got David and Tim Barton. We've got Pastor Rob McCoy, Pastor Jack Hibbs, Jeremy Boring from the Daily Wire, Mark Meckler. I mean, all kinds of people are teaching in this course, so it's very entertaining. I actually do the Constitution part in Independence Hall. So I'm in the room where the Constitution was framed, and that is a very fun way to learn the Constitution. I hope you'll check that out and be a part of it. Okay, I do want to give you a quick summary of what Patriot Academy is doing, why it's so important, and why you can be a part of it. I'm going to play a video that will do that for you, and it kind of summarizes how cultural Marxism has seeped into the culture and what we're doing about it. And the video is going to finish out telling you a little bit about our campus that we're building in Texas. And I want to invite students from Maine. In about 2 years, you can come spend a year with us at our Gap Year program, 18 to 25-year-olds for 1 year on our amazing campus with a mock-up of Independence Hall, getting grounded in biblical worldview, grounded in constitutional jurisdictions, and really good leadership skills. So watch this video real quick. It'll summarize the things we're doing at Patriot Academy, and then when we come back, I'm going to close with a story from the founding era about another time in American history where they were facing even tougher odds and more challenges than what we're facing right now. Have you noticed how many freedom-loving, hard-working Americans believe that America's best days are behind us? Have you felt that way? I know it's been a question discussed around our dinner table, and I'll admit that in many important ways, the American culture is crumbling. What started as just cracks in the foundation, in fact, the strongest national foundation in history, but those cracks were ignored for decades while the poison of Marxism and critical race theory were poured into the minds of the nation's youth, and now it's spilled out into the streets, and it seems like every major institution in the country, from the press to education to corporate America, even too often the pulpit, has given way to the revisionist. They've bought the lies about this nation. What was once the wealthiest, most powerful, most free, most benevolent nation the world has ever known, indeed America was the envy of the world, well, that has now become a place where we've allowed our school children to be taught to hate their own nation, to hate each other, and even to hate themselves. The results have been devastating, but I, for one, do not believe that is the end of the American story. You see, the principles of liberty, that's not what failed us. Our leaders failed us, and we sat on the sidelines watching it happen. But now there's this awakening that is happening all across the nation, from sea to shining sea. Patriots of every age, income, religion, race, all over the country, they are ready to do their part to restore the American Constitution, to restore the timeless principles of liberty upon which America was founded. Most patriots know something needs to be done, and they're willing to help, and just don't know what to do. Well, we here at Patriot Academy, we know what to do, and we're doing it. More importantly, we're raising up a new generation of patriots to do it. While some look at the rubble right now and they choose to give up, we at Patriot Academy, we look at that rubble and we choose to rebuild. From Constitution coaches in every community across America, to teaching candidates to run for local office, to raising up young leaders steeped in constitutional and biblical values, Patriot Academy is equipping citizens to do their part in restoring America. The Patriot Academy campus, strategically placed in the heart of Texas, is ground zero for a new birth of freedom so the government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Arriving at the Patriot Academy campus, you will first be greeted by a mock-up of the Lexington Green. That's where it all began on April 19, 1775. And every visitor to the campus will meet Pastor Jonas Clark, Captain John Parker, and citizen soldier Levi Preston. In those three statues, we will be reminded that no matter what walk of life we come from, each of us has a pivotal role to play in preserving and passing the torch of freedom. Constitution coaches from across the nation will be able to come to our campus and learn and get their training in an exact replica of Independence Hall, the cradle of liberty, the very place where both the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were created. Our Center for Constitutional Defense will be housed in a mock-up of Monticello, providing both intellectual and physical training for defending the Bill of Rights with rapid response media to impact the debate on a national scale. We provide on-site housing for visitors and patriots attending our weekend trainings, as well as a rich campus life for young leaders chosen for our one-year leadership intensive. These 18 to 25-year-olds will build a strong foundation in leadership skills, constitutional grounding, and biblical worldview. Patriot Academy gives them a challenging, inspiring, and iron-sharpening iron-type environment to discover their passion, plan their purpose, and learn how to effectively execute that plan in whatever area of the culture God has called them. And we teach them how to be active biblical citizens for the rest of their lives. With the American story woven throughout every part of the campus, Patriot Academy will continue our tradition of bringing history to life through entertaining, educational, practical application. Even the Welcome Center will give visitors the chance to experience all the rich history found in the rotunda of the United States Capitol, while the mock legislative chambers will give students of all ages the opportunity to see and live the inner workings of our constitutional republic. This is the hour that our generation gets to stand guard at the Watchtower of Freedom. The time is now to make the investment of purpose, of time and resources necessary to preserve the torch of freedom and pass her intact to the next generation. If you know in your heart that you want to be part of the solution, part of the rebuilding, then visit patriotacademy.com today to learn more. All right, folks, so that gives you a pretty quick summary of what we're doing at Patriot Academy and how you can be involved with it. I said before the video I wanted to close with a story from American history that I think is somewhat parallel to what we're doing, but far worse. I mean, parallel to what we're facing, I should say. I mean, the things that we're facing now pale in comparison to what this generation of Americans was facing. So get in my time machine with me, the Green Family Time Machine. We're going to go back in time to the Revolutionary War, and our time machine is going to stop 1 week before Christmas when the Americans are losing at every level. I mean, they are completely defeated, demoralized, worn out, they're deflated. And just to summarize what's happened to them in the previous 5 months, they've lost battle after battle. 90% of the troops have deserted and gone home. Washington's got a small band that's still left with him. It's gotten bad. I mean, by the second week of December, if you were looking at the history back then, Washington's been running all over New Jersey and Pennsylvania. The war's going so bad that Congress has actually fled Philadelphia. They're afraid the British are about to take over there. It's bad, folks, and I mean the troops are not doing well. Scores of American troops have been killed, wounded, captured, supplies have been lost, strategic spots captured. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but everything that could go wrong had gone wrong. And most people, I think, at that point kind of assumed America's done for. This thing's over 5 months into we declared our independence just 5 months before. It's already over. So even though the Declaration of Independence being signed was, big motivator and all that, 5 months later, they've lost. It looks like the whole thing's done. So that's the setting. That's the environment that I'm taking you to as we get out of our time machine, and we're going to sneak up and look over the shoulder of Thomas Paine. Now, I don't know if he was sitting around the campfire when he wrote this, or if he was, in a hut, in some building with candlelight, writing by candlelight. But I kind of imagine him being huddled around the campfire. I imagine him actually, there being troop campfires all around him, and he's looking at them, and he's thinking about them, and he's thinking about the cause when he writes these words that would become known as the American Crisis pamphlet, and there'd be multiple iterations of it in the coming years. But here's what he said. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Friends, I believe just like at that moment when Thomas Paine penned those words, we live in a time not for summer soldiers or sunshine patriots. This is a time for winter soldiers. This is a time for people that are willing to be in this for the long haul, willing to stand up for freedom, willing to sacrifice, willing to invest their time, their money, their energy, all those things into preserving liberty. And if I could speak to people of faith for a moment, this is not a time for mamsy-pamsy, feel-good Christianity. Jesus was the lamb, but he was also the lion. And if the American church is going to have any chance of being able to defeat the evil, yes, evil agenda that is marching across America and winning right now, if we have any chance of stopping that agenda in its tracks and pushing back and restoring the heart and soul of America, then we're going to have to tap into that lion part of Jesus to fight those kind of battles. In fact, we're going to need some leaders like in the Old Testament. We're going to need some Shadrachs and some Josiahs, some King Davids, some Deborahs, some Jaels. We're going to need some Daniels. We're going to need people that are willing to stand up. And if that's you, if you're a lover of liberty, if you're a lover of justice, and I mean blind justice, equal justice for all, if you're a lover of God's word, then you have a role to play in restoring liberty in America. I promise you, I know this in my core. There are people in your family, in your community, at your church that are just waiting for somebody to raise that banner. They will rally. They're waiting for someone to bring them the tools that they need to get engaged. I promise you that's the case. I see it happen every day in communities all across America through our Constitution Coach program. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Restoring the principles of liberty is not going to be easy. It's going to take time. It's going to be a tough fight. But we have the tools we need if we'll get engaged. So it's not a time to despair. It's rather a time to shift our focus and say, I'm willing to spend more of my time, energy, money, all of those things in order to save freedom. If I could use a Texas expression for you folks in Maine, it's time to cowboy up. It's time for us to buck up and say, I'm willing to do what it takes. Thomas Paine also said, those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, meaning like adults, must, like men, undergo the fatigues of supporting it. You want the blessings of liberty? You got to undergo the fatigues of supporting it. Are you willing to do that? I'm willing. I know that you are. I know that there are millions of patriots across America willing to do that. So I'm going to close with the rest of the story, kind of my Paul Harvey moment, if you will, from that Christmas whenever Thomas Paine wrote those amazing words in the American Crisis. Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, he actually wrote a book on this. It's called To Try Men's Souls, and I'm just going to read directly from his book. He said, by Christmas Day, so it's a week after Thomas Paine wrote those words, by Christmas Day, 1776, Washington's army had collapsed from 30,000 to 2,500. Less than 1 in 1,000 Americans had the courage to stand with Washington. Let me say that slower. Less than 1 out of every 1,000 Americans had the courage to stand with Washington on Christmas Day. 1/3 of the American soldiers had no boots. They wrapped their feet in burlap and left a trail of blood marching 9 miles to Trenton. Washington decided to cross an icy river at night in the middle of a snowstorm to surprise the 1,500 professional soldiers. Gingrich finishes it this way. He said, in less than 1 hour, the Americans won a stunning victory. Not a single American soldier was lost, and 900 of the Hessians were captured. Now, these were professional Hessian soldiers, folks. This would be like the Boy Scouts taking on the Navy SEALs, and yet the results were incredible. The next day saw the next 10 days saw the greatest military comeback in history as Washington's ranks swelled to 15,000 in just 2 weeks. Here's my favorite part. The password that Christmas night was victory or death. They were committed to the cause. They were willing to pay the price. This country was created by people who were willing to say victory or death while marching in burlap bags in the middle of a snowstorm. We need another generation like that. We're raising up another generation like that at Patriot Academy, and I know you're raising up a generation like that in Maine with the homeschoolers of Maine. In fact, let me just say this to the homeschoolers for a second. My mom homeschooled me back in the day when you didn't answer the front door for fear of being arrested. And people would stop her and say, oh, what a sacrifice. You're homeschooling? That's an amazing sacrifice. She always stopped them and said, no, it's not a sacrifice. It's an investment. Homeschoolers of Maine, you are investing not just in your children, which is the most important piece, right? But you're also investing in the future of our nation. You're investing in the future of freedom. Thank you for being willing to make that investment. I believe that this is our American crisis. This is our moment to stand guard at the watchtower of freedom and answer the question, what will history's chapter on our generation look like? Are they going to say that on our watch the torch of freedom was only dimly lit or, God forbid, extinguished? I don't think so. No, in fact, I believe based on what I'm seeing with groups just like yours and others all across this nation, I get to travel the nation nonstop almost, seeing large groups of Americans and small groups of Americans coming together and saying, not on my watch will freedom be lost. They're getting involved. They're getting engaged. They're doing what it takes to restore liberty, and I know that you'll do the same. Thank you for being willing to stand. Let's make sure that history's chapter, when history writes its chapter on our generation, that chapter is going to say that on our watch, the torch of freedom burned even brighter than ever before. God bless you, and thanks for letting me share.